Some buildings were made to contain something, not just people, but the pieces of them they'd rather forget. Asylum, 1972, was never just a film about madness. It was madness, folded in layers of story, paranoia, and silence. Underneath its anthology surface lies something deeper, a whisper in the hallway, a shadow behind your reflection, a question that was never meant to be answered. Directed by Roy Ward Baker and written by Robert Bloch, creator of Psycho, this film lures you in with 4 tales of terror, told by patients too broken to trust. But the real horror, it isn't in their stories. It's in what connects them. What begins as a simple job interview becomes a descent into confusion, identity loss, and reality itself, bending at the corners. Mannequins twitch, voices echo without sources. Time loops in on itself. The deeper you go, the more you realize no one here is trying to escape. They're just waiting for the next to arrive. And the scariest part? That next one might be you. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Asylum, 1972. Details buried by the studio, blurred by memory, or whispered about long after the camera stopped rolling. Fact 1. When Bloch lost control of his own stories, Robert Bloch had long explored the dark crevices of the human mind, but with Asylum, something slipped from his grasp. While scripting the segments, he confessed in a letter to a friend that these stories felt uninvited. He wasn't composing them, they were arriving, complete, vivid, and unwelcome. The structure of Asylum, a patchwork of disturbing encounters within a crumbling institution, wasn't Bloch's initial plan. In fact, early drafts of the screenplay were darker, far more surreal. One version ended with a man waking up inside a mannequin, unable to scream. Another had a looping finale where time rewound endlessly, as each patient recited the same story to new visitors. Studio executives balked. Roy Ward Baker agreed that certain endings went too far into abstraction. Bloch was forced to revise, but even then, he warned, these aren't just stories, they feel like recordings. The tales that survived still carry that strange weight, like echoes from a place that doesn't exist, but remembers you anyway. What terrified Bloch wasn't what he created, but the feeling he hadn't created it at all. And perhaps that's why Asylum doesn't just disturb, it infects. Fact 2. Otto never blinked, but Krev said he watched. The mannequin in The Weird Tailor was never meant to do more than stand, but according to cast and crew, something about Otto made it feel like he was waiting, or worse, judging. Crafted from modified wax and rubber, Otto had no moving parts. Yet, people claimed his head was at a different angle between takes. Some said his arms were longer by a fraction. Most disturbingly, several crew members refused to be alone in the room with him, even in daylight. One sound technician swore he heard breathing close, sharp, and deliberate during a completely silent take. The audio recorder picked up nothing. He quit the next day. Was it suggestion, mass hysteria, or had Otto become more than a prop? After filming, the mannequin disappeared. Not sold, not stored, no documentation. The studio never commented, and in horror forums decades later, collectors claim to have seen it in auction photos, in estate sales, in basements. Always the same frame, always looking at the camera, smiling. Fact 3. Cushing's scene that went too deep. Peter Cushing was the professional's professional, disciplined, controlled, precise. But something broke during one take of The Weird Tailor. As the cameras rolled, Cushing entered his scene. He spoke one line, then froze. His face dropped. His breathing shortened. Tears welled up, unprompted, unrehearsed. The set fell silent. No one dared call cut. But eventually, Cushing walked off. No explanation, no apology, just stillness. What the crew didn't know was that earlier that morning, Cushing had received a letter. A close friend had passed away. He hadn't told anyone, but the funeral arrangements were inside his coat pocket, folded neatly, like the suit his character wore. The next day, he returned, composed. The scene was reshot, but if you watch closely in the final cut, there's a weight in his eyes. A pause that wasn't written, a tremble that doesn't match the script. Sometimes, the real horror doesn't come from props or blood. Sometimes, it comes when you realize the actor isn't acting. Fact 4. The fifth story no one ever saw. Asylum is known for its 4 haunting segments, but hidden in early drafts was a 5th one that never reached the screen. Titled The Reflection, it centered on a patient haunted by a version of herself trapped inside a mirror, growing more hostile with each encounter. Bloch considered it one of his most philosophically terrifying stories, blending identity loss and supernatural possession. The plot climaxed when the reflection stepped out of the glass, leaving the real woman trapped behind it. So why was it cut? Officially, pacing concerns. Unofficially, fear. Internal memos reveal that test readers found it unsettling in a way that lingered beyond logic. Block pushed for its inclusion, but the producers rejected it. "There's something about mirrors," one executive wrote, "that shows more than we want." The segment was quietly shelved. No footage exists. Only a handful of lines survived, later repurposed in a short story, Block published years later. To this day, fans speculate about what the reflection might have added to the film's web of fractured minds. Some say it would have tied all the segments together. Others believe it was too dangerous to show. Perhaps it still exists waiting to come through the glass. Fact 5. The real killing outside the soundstage. While Asylum was filming inside Shepperton Studios, a murder occurred just blocks away, grisly, ritualistic, and eerily similar to the events of one of the film's segments. The victim was found contorted, arms tied, with strange symbols drawn on the walls. Local authorities brushed off any connection, but several crew members noticed uncanny parallels between the crime scene and a scene they had shot 2 days prior, right down to the positioning of the body. Rumors spiraled. One assistant director refused to return to night shoots. Another claimed she saw someone watching the studio from across the lot each night after rap someone who didn't work there. Roy Ward Baker was reportedly shaken. He rewrote transitions to distance the film from real-life similarities, but he didn't deny the link outright. The case was eventually closed. A suspect was arrested, a man with a long psychiatric history. Yet the details remained redacted. No motive, no media coverage beyond a few lines in a local column. Was it imitation? Or were fiction and fact bleeding into each other? Asylum blurred those lines by design. Maybe the world just followed suit. Fact 6. The hospital that made people sick. The asylum in Asylum wasn't just a set. Much of the film was shot on location inside an abandoned wing of a real hospital, one that, according to local lore, had been closed after a series of patient deaths and staff breakdowns. Production designer Tony Curtis saw potential in the architecture, its peeling walls, iron doors, and impossible acoustics. But as shooting progressed, something strange happened. People started getting sick. It began subtly, nausea, migraines, but then came vertigo, hallucinations. A gaffer collapsed in a hallway, convinced he was falling even though he was lying flat. An actress claimed she kept hearing her lines whispered back at her off cue, and in a different voice. Curtis later admitted he had deliberately manipulated perspective in the space, building false angles, sloped floors, and disorienting lighting to unsettle both actors and crew. But some say the building had its own presence, one that didn't need help. The production wrapped early. The hospital wing was sealed days later. No other film was allowed to shoot there again. And in interviews years later, crew members still speak of that location, not with nostalgia, but dread, as if something in those walls had been watching them the entire time. Fact 7. The framing story that almost never happened. One of Asylum's most unsettling features is its wraparound story, the interview that becomes a trap. But what's less known is that this crucial framing wasn't part of the original plan. Amicus originally considered a simple anthology with no narrative connection, just 4 isolated tales. But after early assembly cuts, producers sensed something was missing. The stories were strong, said editor Peter Tanner, but they felt like floating islands. So, under time pressure, Robert Bloch devised the framework, Dr. Martin's psychological evaluation, unknowingly walking into his own diagnosis. It was written and shot in just over a week, and ironically, it became the glue that gave the film its paranoia. The twist where Martin becomes the next patient was added last. It wasn't in Bloch's script, nor the studio's note, but Roy Ward Baker insisted on it, believing the film needed to fold in on itself like a trap door. That last-minute decision elevated Asylum beyond anthology. It became an organism, alive, looping, and deeply aware of the viewer. Maybe that's why, even today, we still feel like the film is watching us. Fact 8. The reel that dissolved into legend. Film reels go missing. It happens. But with Asylum, the mystery of the lost footage from Lucy Comes to Stay became something else, entirely a whispered myth. Editor Peter Tanner recalled receiving multiple takes of a version with heightened violence, more blood, longer screams, and a surreal moment where Lucy appeared to phase through a mirror. It was bold, experimental, disturbing, and then it was gone. The reel was logged, marked, placed in storage, and never seen again. At first, it was blamed on a mislabeling error, but when the final cut aired, Tanner noticed specific shots missing takes he personally remembered editing. When he asked the archive manager, he was told no such reel had ever existed. Years later, 2 frames from that footage surfaced in a BBC documentary. The origin? Unidentified horror outtakes, early 70 seconds. They matched Asylum's lighting, camera stock, and costume. So who took it? And what did they see that made them decide no one else ever should? Fact 9. The unrecorded whisper. There's a moment in Mannequins of Horror that chills even the most seasoned viewers. As the puppet twitches to life, a whisper cuts through the silence, indistinct, almost subliminal. Rewind, pause, enhance. You'll hear it. A voice saying, "Come closer." The problem? That whisper doesn't exist in the official audio track. Peter Musgrave, sound supervisor, swore it wasn't in any mix. "We didn't record that. It's not on the stems. It's not on the reel." Multiple engineers confirmed it wasn't listed on any cue sheet or noted in the post-production logs. And yet, it's there. Fans isolated the waveform. It registers. It's real. So where did it come from? Some say it was captured accidentally, a bleed from another stage. Others believe it's an audio illusion, a trick of suggestion. But there's a darker theory that something on set wanted to be heard. The voice isn't credited, it isn't owned, but it speaks. And maybe, just maybe, it's still speaking. Fact 10. The suit that refused to be finished. In The Weird Tailor, a cursed suit becomes the vessel for resurrection. But behind the scenes, the costume department struggled with something stranger. They simply couldn't finish the suit. 3 separate attempts were made to build the garment as described in the script. Jet black, ancient, styled, with runes along the seams. But each time the stitching came undone, material went missing. One tailor sliced his palm open, unprovoked, while sewing. Designer Daphne Howard described it as a pattern that resisted being followed. She eventually abandoned the original design and pieced together random cloth scraps from previous productions. It wasn't what the director asked for, she admitted, but it looked right. Oddities persisted. On set, the fabric made faint crinkling sounds like whispers. In post-production, its color tone shifted without digital correction. One assistant editor noted, "It didn't photograph like anything else. The final suit, as seen in the film, doesn't match any sketch. No photos exist of it off-camera." And when Amicus auctioned props years later, the suit wasn't among them. Some believe it was lost. Others say it completed itself and walked away. Fact 11. The performance that broke a promise. Barbara Parkins delivered a performance in Lucy Comes to Stay that blurred the line between sanity and split identity. But few know that it came at a cost she never planned to pay. After production ended, Parkins withdrew from public appearances. No premieres, no interviews, no retrospectives. For nearly 2 years, she maintained total silence. Friends said she became obsessed with mirrors, covering them at home, avoiding them entirely in public spaces. One confidant revealed Parkins claimed to see someone else staring back, a second self she couldn't control. When she finally gave a short interview in 1975, she said only, "Lucy never left." She turned down offers from major studios, retreated from horror entirely, and rejected fan mail related to Asylum. To this day, she's never confirmed what happened on set, but makeup artists recall she became terrified during a reshoot involving a broken mirror. She insisted the glass was wrong. It wasn't cracked. It was reflecting something that wasn't in frame. Fact 12. The patient who shaped the script. When Robert Bloch visited psychiatric hospitals in the 1,960 seconds for research, one encounter lingered. A woman silent at first began speaking in multiple voices during their interview. Each had a name, a history, and none knew of the others. Bloch was shaken. He never recorded her real name, referring to her only as the Switch. She believed she had already died, but kept being pulled back into someone else's dream. One persona even claimed to recognize Bloch, insisting, "You're the one who writes what I say." Decades later, scholars noticed uncanny parallels between her descriptions and Asylum's fragmented structure. The repetition, the identity slippage, the sense that the real subject is outside the frame. Bloch never confirmed the link, but in one handwritten note found in his archives, he scribbled, "She's still in there, waiting for another scene." No records of the woman remain. The hospital was shut down. Staff names were lost, but her story, if you believe it was hers, still plays, again and again. Fact 13. The head that kept leaking. Props can malfunction. But on Asylum, the severed mannequin head used in Mannequins of Horror didn't just break, it bled. The head, sculpted from rubber and latex, was built to stay dry. Yet during one afternoon of shooting, a red liquid began to seep from its eye socket. It wasn't blood gel. It wasn't dye. Crew described it as thin, metallic smelling, and warm to the touch. At first, they assumed it was a leak from a storage canister or a broken effect tube, but effects supervisor Jim Newman insisted there were no liquid mechanisms inside. They opened the prop. It was dry. Later, they discovered that the mannequin's neck had previously been used in another production, one that involved experimental fluid packs for a wound scene. But no one could explain how those sealed packs reactivated. Newman discarded the head immediately. It was never used again. Yet when the film premiered, attentive viewers noticed something eerie, a scene in which the head appears to move not mechanically, but subtly, a slight shift, a tilt, like it was aware. Fact 14, the man who never returned to horror. Milton Subotsky had co-produced most of Amicus's legendary horror films, but Asylum changed him. Midway through production, he stopped visiting the set. He declined meetings. He left notes instead of phone calls. No one knew why. One memo he sent to Roy Ward Baker read, "You've built a maze with no exits." Another included a warning, "You are not in control." Colleagues assumed burnout. But years later, Subotsky told a friend in private that he had recurring dreams while Asylum was in post-production. In them, he walked through hospital corridors that shifted endlessly. The voices behind the doors knew his name. One even said, "You gave us the map." He never publicly acknowledged the film again. When Amicus held a retrospective screening in the 1,980 seconds, Subotsky declined the invitation. "That film is unfinished," he reportedly said, even if the credits rolled. For a man who shaped an era of British horror, his silence on Asylum is louder than any scream. Fact 15. The room no camera entered. Throughout Asylum, multiple characters reference. Room, 19 nurses warn about it, a chart labels it, and a patient mutters its number repeatedly. But it never appears on screen. Why? Set designer Tony Curtis confirmed that a Room 19 set was partially constructed but never filmed. The director reportedly scrapped it after several issues. The lights wouldn't stay on. Electrical surges ruined equipment. On one occasion, a dolly track warped overnight, despite stable temperatures. Actors refused to rehearse in the space. Charlotte Rampling allegedly entered once, stood still for 5 minutes, then walked out without a word. Curtis finally dismantled the set and left a small note on the storage crate. "Do not rebuild." In the final cut, Room 19 is only heard, never seen, but its presence lingers. In every mention, there's a hesitation, a glance, an unspoken warning, as if showing it would reveal something the film wasn't ready to confront. Fact 16. The ending that was never written. The final scene of Asylum, where Dr. Martin becomes the new patient, is one of the film's most haunting turns. But this twist wasn't in any draft of the original screenplay. Robert Bloch had envisioned a more traditional resolution. Dr. Martin leaves shaken, perhaps wiser, but intact. It was Roy Ward Baker who insisted on a darker conclusion. "If the house is cursed," he said, "no one leaves unchanged." The crew was divided. Some called it cynical, others called it genius. The scene was scripted the night before filming, shot in one take, and left even the actor playing Martin stunned. "I didn't realize," he later said, "that I was the villain until the straitjacket was already on me." That one change reframed the film. No longer a story about confronting madness, but one about absorbing it, becoming it, succumbing to it. It wasn't closure, it was continuation. Fact 17. The missing score that people remember. Composer Douglas Gamley recorded a full musical suite for Asylum, a drifting, dissonant composition titled "The Ward Sleeps." It was meant to underscore the film's central descent, layered under the wraparound narrative. But when the final version of the film was released, the music was gone. Gamley was livid. He insisted it had been delivered, mixed, approved. Audio engineers confirmed it had been logged. Yet when the master print was reviewed, the suite had vanished. No stems, no backups, no fragments. Years later, fans who attended early UK screenings began to describe a melody not present in the DVD or Blu-ray, a slow, hollow motif built around descending notes. Some even claimed to hum the same tune independently. No recording has ever surfaced, but multiple viewers remember the same composition, note for note. Did it play only once, or did it play for those who were really listening? Fact 18. The face that changed every time. The mannequin in Mannequins of Horror was supposed to be anonymous, generic, featureless, a blank vessel of terror. But something went wrong in post-production, or right, depending on who you ask. Viewers began reporting that the mannequin's face appeared different in each scene, not dramatically, but subtly. A lift of the cheek, a furrow in the brow, even a glimmer in the eye. At first, editors dismissed it as lighting changes, but when the film was digitized for remastering, they noticed it too. One technician paused the film, stared at a frame, and said, "That looks like my father." Another swore it resembled an actor who had died during filming of a separate project. The original mold has never been located. All production photos show a smooth, inexpressive face, but the one in the final cut looks back. And somehow, always familiar. Fact 19. The author who tried to warn himself, Robert Bloch, wrote horror for decades, but after Asylum, something in his tone changed. He stopped doing interviews about the film. He refused to attend retrospective panels. And in one letter to a friend, he wrote a cryptic line: "The stories weren't mine by the end. They were watching me." This wasn't just metaphor. Bloch kept a journal while writing the screenplay. In it, he noted recurring dreams, corridors that stretched forever, voices behind doors calling his name, mirrors that showed different versions of himself, typing the same line again and again. He once wrote that Asylum was the only script he completed without reading back any scene twice. "It was as if I wasn't supposed to." After production, he burned several pages of the early draft. When asked why, he answered, "Some reflections are better left distorted." His notes contain repeated phrases, some cross-referenced with lines spoken by characters in the final cut, despite not appearing in the shooting script. It raises a strange question. Was Bloch documenting fiction or recording transmission? Fact 20. The image that shouldn't be there. At exactly 1 hour, 12 minutes, and 47 seconds into Asylum, a single frame interrupts the footage. Most viewers miss it. It's fast, hidden, forgotten. But those who have seen it never forget. It's an image, black and white, overexposed. A man, thin and pale, wearing a coat with no buttons. His mouth is slightly open, like mid-sentence. His eyes are focused straight ahead, at the camera, at you. No actor was cast for this role. No scene in the film includes this costume. The production team denies its existence, yet the frame is present in multiple prints, including versions released years apart in different countries. Some say it's a spliced error, others call it subliminal marketing, but those who pause the film really pause it, report something else: a shift in temperature, a change in sound, and, sometimes, their own reflection, slightly delayed. Bonus fact: the loop no one escapes. The ending of Asylum leaves us with a haunting cycle. One doctor in, one patient out, or so it seems. But what if no one ever leaves? The theory goes deeper. Symbols recur, dialogues echo, faces blur. Even the pacing loops back to the beginning almost perfectly. Some fans believe the film is a closed system, a trap disguised as narrative. It's not a movie about madness. It's a movie that creates it. One forum post in 2009 posed a chilling question: what if every viewing adds you to the Asylum? They were joking. Probably. But if you find yourself thinking about Asylum more than you should if scenes replay at night, or you begin noticing odd reflections, it might be too late. Because the film didn't end. It just absorbed one more visitor. You've heard the stories. You've seen the patterns. But one question remains. Which truth disturbed you most? And which one still doesn't feel like fiction? If this film unsettled you, good. It was supposed to. If it followed you after the credits, better. That means you were paying attention. Drop a comment below. Tell us, was Asylum just a movie, or did it get too close? Like this video if you saw something we didn't. Subscribe if you're brave enough to follow us into the next locked door. And whatever you do, don't trust the mirror.